Welcome to the Four Eyes podcast, brought to you by Young OD Connect. We give you a clear view into the new grad optometry world across Canada and the US. We are your hosts. I'm Dr. Deepan Kaur.
And I'm Dr. Amrit Bilku. And today we have Dr. Alison Bozung joining us on the podcast to talk about the most important thing that most of us forget to think about when becoming a doctor, juggling your real life with your work life. So Dr. Bozung is an optometrist who graduated from SEO, and she's currently working at Baskin Palmer in Miami, and she's managing the hospital's 24/7 ophthalmic emergency department, and she's the residency program coordinator, which is awesome. And in her oh so little spare time, she's also serving the editorial board for Review of Optometry. She presents at conferences, and she is a founding member of Young OD Connect. And recently, Alison had her first child, and she's now trying to navigate this new world of having to allocate more time for her family while continuing to do the things that she loves in optometry. So, this topic relates to probably so many new grad and young ODs, including ourselves, who have finally entered their careers after, dedicating years of just focusing on optometry, focusing on graduating, focusing on getting a job. And we didn't actually realize that family time was put on the back burner. So we're really looking forward to chatting with Alison and hearing her story. And hopefully just her experience resonates with you, whether you are family planning as a mom or a dad, or just wanting to spend more time with your family members, and how you can kind of navigate your career to make more time for them. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation. So yeah, Alison, this is your first time on our podcast. Welcome. We're really excited to have you on. And so for our listeners, do you mind just telling them a little bit about yourself and what brought you to where you are today?
For sure. Well, thanks for having me on the podcast. Super happy to be invited. Basically, I graduated in 2015 from Southern College of Optometry in Memphis, Tennessee. After that, I did a 1-year disease residency in ocular disease at Bascom Palmer in Miami, Florida. I ended up leaving Florida and taking a job at the University of Iowa and worked in their Department of Ophthalmology for about 3 years before I actually transitioned back to Miami. So I'm back at Bascom Palmer now. And I moved back because my now husband, at the time we were doing long distance, we got engaged. We were apart for 3 years, and then one of us had to move. We always joked it'd be nice to be in the same time zone. And so I was the one that came back down here. So I practice at Bascom Palmer, part of the University of Miami, and currently am the residency director for the optometry residency. Work in the emergency department most of the time, have a few clinic days a month as well, and do some telehealth. So a few different things all wrapped up in one.
They keep you busy there.
Yeah,
Bascom Palmer is like one of the, I believe it's like one of the top residencies, or a lot of, optometry students want to get into that specific program.
Yeah.
How was your residency in that program? Like,
it's been fantastic. I feel like you only really know what you did, right? You can't really compare it to what you didn't do. There are so many fantastic residencies out there, especially in ocular disease. I interviewed at a lot of different ones. So it's really about the fit more than saying, hey, we're the best residency around, because I really don't think that's true. I think that there are lots of great ones. We happen to be the best one for some people. But it was fun. It's fast paced. It's a ton of disease. You see things you've never seen before. You learn kind of the nuances of common disease, as well as, the pathway and leading to a diagnosis for these kind of rare things, and what you have to rule in or out. And then also the best thing is, my, at the time, residency director was Mark Dunbar. And he said, really, it's a year of sitting at the feet of the experts, which I thought was a fantastic way of putting it, because you really are right there seeing patients alongside the people that write, textbook chapters for the rest of the world to learn from. And so that was a really appealing thing to me. And it was a great year.
And just one more question. I mean, we're talking about your residency now, which
I know.
we should have just done a whole nother episode on that.
We need to do another episode on your residency. Yeah.
Just a question, like, was your residency also kind of side by side with ophthalmology residency students? And if so, what was just your general experience with working with ophthalmology side by side, if you did?
Yeah, for sure. So definitely we work side by side. Most of the time our optometry residents work sort of alongside the fellows, actually, the ophthalmology fellows. So they'll be in, a cornea clinic with that cornea attending. And then there's a cornea fellow who's there, and then also our optometry resident. And so they're seeing patients side by side. Really, I mean, the environment's super collaborative. I thought one thing was really interesting to me that a lot of the fellows come from programs that, may or may not be as familiar with optometry in general. And so we would, some of the times where even our residents now, they're like, yeah, this, fellows never worked with an optometrist before. And they thought we just did, glasses. They don't know that we're here, in the clinic, seeing disease, managing glaucoma, things like that. And it really is a super, I think, super way to build those links and kind of bridges between ophthalmology and optometry in a training facility.
Yeah.
So it is pretty cool. And, my experience was good. I actually ended up dating one of the ophthalmology residents during his first year. He's now my husband. So
I was going to be like, oh, tell us this story too now. How did that happen?
That's another story for another.
A little Grey's Anatomy romance in Miami.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, before we get too distracted here, let's get back on topic.
Yes.
This will be for another episode, but so let's get right into it. So in the early days of your career, was family planning a priority in your mind? And if not, what changed your mindset?
Entering my career, family planning was really not probably anywhere on my radar. And that's mostly because the state of life that I was in at that point. I was, dating, but not engaged, not married, and had, just moved to a new state that I'd never lived in before by myself. So not really at that point in time was I kind of thinking down that road. I was very more career oriented at that point.
And then what made you kind of change your mind, or when did you make that decision to start trying to build a family? What did you do to take any proactive steps at work to prepare for future changes?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. For me, it was mostly, like I said before, I moved back to Miami, was, married, living with my husband, which was a great time to have a kid when you're not in different, states.
Yeah.
And so essentially for me, I was kind of like, well, when is the right time? And I think that's a question that pops up for a lot of people. When is a good time to start a family? And there's not really a perfect time. There never will be. You're always going to have other things going on in your life. And so it becomes more of a, do you want a family? And for me, it was kind of, yes, I want, a kid, I want a family. And it was more so, why not now? Instead of, let me just wait till I have all my ducks in a row. Let me wait till, everything's perfect, because it never will be. Yeah. And so the other thing to keep in mind is you never know how long it'll take actually to get pregnant. And so I have a lot of friends, people that I know who've, struggled for years to get pregnant. And I was like, that could be us. That might be that journey that we walk down, or it might not be. And so for me, I thought it was important once we were like, okay, we're ready. We wouldn't be upset about it if it happened now. We'll just start, trying and seeing what happens.
I didn't even think about that, like when to start trying, because you don't know how long that part's going to take, or how, I guess, if you will even become pregnant. So that is a huge point people need to take into consideration when they're planning.
Yeah, the number of miscarriages that people can have on average. You really want to take those things into consideration, because it's real. It could happen to any of us at any time, multiple times. Something that you said, Allison, I think that determines the perfect time to have kids is if it happens, you're not mad about it. So if you sit there and say, I won't be mad if this happens.
Yeah. What I will say is that one thing we tried to do sort of leading up to the possibility of becoming pregnant was lots of trips. And so, that's always been important to us, is traveling. And so we're like, hey, let's go to, we're like so close to different islands in the Caribbean. We can just go for a weekend. Let's go to, different places we've been wanting to go.
Mhm.
And so we started traveling, went to Italy. We went to Patagonia and did, this crazy trip. So harder to do when you're pregnant, obviously.
Yeah.
Not impossible, but difficult. And so we're just basically like planning all these trips, and we're like, okay, at some point we're gonna maybe have to tone down a little bit, but we did a lot of that first too.
And then continue those trips when your kid is like 2 years old, and then take them on the little plane.
2 years.
Not 2 years. So we actually went to Japan when I was 4 months pregnant. So and she already has her passport. Our baby is 2 months old. So she's got her passport.
She's gonna be a travel baby in those little travel backpacks.
City in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors dependent on this. Like if your pregnancy is even going well, like if you're handling it well, all these different things. But yeah, nothing should hold you back in general.
Yeah.
But now, like, to get to I think the more juicy part that everyone's a little bit more interested in. So your mat leave, really, the question about that. So what maternity coverage was provided for you, if any? And is maternity leave given through work or federal support? And is there a difference for independent contractors versus employed optometrists?
Yeah, so all really great questions. And I think I could probably speak to at least some of the US listeners. Maybe I don't know the difference, whether it's like in Canada. You guys would definitely know that more than me.
Yeah.
But essentially, in the US, your employer should give you, it's federally mandated that you get 12 weeks of unpaid. So that's FMLA, unpaid leave. So basically, all it means is that you get those 12 weeks, you're guaranteed to get your job back when you come back. So they can't fire you. That's all it means.
Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that you get paid. It doesn't mean that, you get any additional benefits besides healthcare, which you obviously maintain because you've maintained your job. And it is different depending on the type of work. So if you're what we call like a 1099 employee, that technically, or like an independent contractor, you would not have that FMLA guaranteed to you. It might be more of a sort of something you'd work out with your employer if they potentially be able to offer that, but it would not be something that's mandated. And depending on the type of practice you're working for, like a really small, one doctor place, they might not be able to afford that to someone that's, doing a 1099 work for the most part, independent contracting. So it can be a little bit different. I was fairly fortunate. Ours was, I took the 12 weeks of maternity leave. They actually offered partial pay for the first 6 weeks. And then I also substituted the additional rest of the pay with something called short-term disability. And so that's something that a lot of people don't know about. At least here, you should sign up for, if you're thinking about having kids, you can sign up for it. You have to sign up for it before you're pregnant. Because it's kind of like a pre-existing condition. So I actually signed up basically a year before we got pregnant. So I had that, and you pay each month a little bit, but it does add up over those, 6 weeks. They pay for about 6 weeks, at least the one that I signed up with. So that helps with some of the pay while you're out. Together, mine ended up being about 100% of my normal pay. And then the second 6 weeks is essentially when I'm using my sick time, my vacation time, things like that through my work, which is mandated. So I do still get paid, but I'm also using up that time, which is sort of a trade-off.
Wow. Yeah, it gets very complicated, I feel, when you have the different types of jobs, the different, like the independent contract versus being an employee. And 12 weeks is so short. I think every Canadian has heard that about US mat leave. And we're just like,
what is it in Canada? I actually don't know.
I think 40 weeks. So like almost a year, pretty much.
Oh.
Yeah.
But I don't know, but I don't think we get so I was just talking to my friend about this the other day because she just had her baby 9 months ago. And she said it's not, so if you take a year off in Canada, you don't always get the full pay. It's like a little bit less. If you take a shorter amount, then you might get full pay, but it's not the full amount of pay if you take the whole year.
Yeah.
Or I think ours could be even up to 18 months I believe.
Wow.
That's what I was told.
Yes.
Yeah.
I should move to Canada. No, I'm kidding. I think one thing that I would definitely say, no matter what your setup is, if you're an employee, there's going to be some kind of HR resource for you. And so make sure that even as a woman, if you're not, thinking about having a kid anytime soon, it's still important to know what your employer's policy is, because it's not like it's something that's never happened before. No one's ever had a kid here. Like that's probably not going to happen. And so there is a policy in place. It's important to know that. And then hopefully there's someone that can help to kind of read between the lines. So I was on the phone with HR a lot to help me just make sure I knew exactly what to expect. And then also if you have other, colleagues that have kind of gone through the process, that's always really helpful too.
Yeah. And so let's say aside from maternity or paternity leave, if you're planning for a family, what other health benefits are really important to take into consideration as an optometrist when you're planning?
Probably a lot of different things. One thing that's probably a more immediate concern would be the childcare, if you're going back to work. So does your employer help with any of that? Does, government help with any of that? Here, they don't. You're kind of just like on your own. And so finding out something that works for you. So location to house, making sure it's a place that's safe, that you trust. So that's a big one. That's a huge one. And it was here, at least, it's like the second you find out you're pregnant, or, it's viable, the pregnancy, even if, no matter what happens, it's still a good idea to start looking for childcare early, because a lot of places and what you hear from friends is like, we started looking, we just found out we're pregnant, we're at maybe week 6 or something like that of pregnancy, and we're already on the wait list for next year. So getting childcare is hard. And we just found out for ours, I pretty much called, like, I think I was 8 weeks pregnant, and they were like, oh, we can't guarantee a spot. And it wasn't until about 3 weeks ago that they're like, okay, a spot opened up. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Oh my God.
But it does that. And so we got on the wait list for a couple different places. We had our preferences, but at least making sure you have something when you go back. It's not something you want to wait on. Another thing, at least here, especially with your employer, they might have some sort of, HSA or FSA, some kind of health savings account that you can use, or something that you can use to maybe they use some here, they call it, I think, a childcare credit or something, but there's different ways that they can maybe offer money that's pre-tax to come out and go to a special account that can be used to care for family members. So it could be for childcare, could be for elderly care in some places. So that's another thing you can think about. Just ways to save a little bit of money on those things.
Yeah, you're not the only person who's brought up stories like that. The wait lists.
Oh yeah.
Not even just daycare. I mean, I've had a cousin who was pregnant trying to sign up her child for preschool. Like 4 years in advance. I'm not lying. This is a real story. And she was on a wait list. And I was like, this is not something that I think needs to stress you out during your pregnancy.
Right.
But unfortunately, that's the reality. Yeah, that's insane. So now is your daughter like, is she like locked in and ready to go for daycare when she's old enough?
She is. So yeah, she'll pretty much just go back when I go back to work. We're all set. So
that's good.
That's a huge weight off your shoulders when it kind of lines up and you get like a spot. You're like, oh, okay, I can breathe now. Like I can go back to work and not be like, what am I going to do with her?
So Alison, I think this is a really important question that goes really like deep surface level, or under the surface. How important are the support systems in this stage of your life? And what advice would you give to other new parents that may not have this type of a support system to rely on?
It's a really great question. And I think that it obviously is going to be different for everybody for a couple of reasons. Number one, not everybody has, family nearby or good friends nearby that can help and, jump in if your child is sick or something. And then the other thing is, I think people need different things. So some people need more, emotional support because raising a child is hard, especially at the beginning. You're hormones are kind of all over the place and you think you're doing a terrible job sometimes. And then sometimes you think you're like the most awesome ever. And it can vary in the matter of like an hour. So there's like a lot that goes through, your mind. And so, for us, I can speak to my experience. I had my parents come, the first week that she was born, and that was super helpful to have my mom there with me. They left, and then my husband's parents came, and it was, again, they were awesome, helpful, things like that. But my parents live in Missouri and his parents live in California. And so we don't have family nearby. And so would I love to have that kind of network? Absolutely. But we just don't have it. And, as far as friends, of course, we have wonderful friends here, but we're not like, hey, can you, come watch our sick kid? Because they also have careers, they're working and it's not their kid. So having that support network in terms of friendships is awesome, but it's not going to help with childcare. So that's something that, from our standpoint right now, we're probably going to have a little bit of a tough time navigating that. So I do think that support networks are amazing if you can have them, but they're not mandatory. And so I wouldn't say that should be your, a factor that holds you back if you're thinking about starting a family. I think people make it work. For example, our hospital has something that they sort of offer, like, hey, there's this network of people that are vetted, through some of our childcare facilities. And if you have a kid that, can't go to childcare, but you need to go to work, you can go through this link or these resources and get, kind of emergency childcare for a day or two, here and there. So that's kind of a unique one, but there are other services, or just finding a way to, discuss with your employer. Hopefully there's some flexibility. Hey, if I need to stay home, what do I do? What happens? And I think that, for my husband and I, we have different administration days. And so we both have different administrative duties, and our days are different. So if I need to, I can work from home on my admin day when I'm doing a lot of stuff on the computer. If she gets sick on a Monday, I might be in luck, right? But other days, hopefully my I'm telehealth some days, so it might be a little bit easier to stay at home, even though they're pretty busy days, or things like that. But I think people make it work. I guess maybe ask me that question in like 3 months. Oh no, I'll have maybe more insight into how it worked. But I think people figure it out when they need to,
Yeah. I think when you brought up the childcare and daycare, I think it's important if you know that there aren't that many family members that live near you, if all of your friends are also not in that same, point in their life where they are having kids and, they're still out traveling all the time, no responsibilities, living their life free. You can also then mentally start planning, okay, I'm probably going to have to be that person that needs daycare and needs childcare. Let's open up the piggy bank and, start saving for that and signing up and planning for that. So, we're fortunate. I'm fortunate. I live 20 minutes away from my parents and my in-laws. They are all ready to take early retirement once the first grandchild pops out.
Oh my gosh, that's
because
amazing.
they are all ready. They're like, we're only alive now to see grandkids. So nothing else in life. So, we're fortunate enough where we know, anytime a child enters our life, we have plenty of people around to pitch in and, help raise our kids together. But like you said, there's so many people that probably already know they don't have access to that on an everyday basis. So then plan ahead, plan early. And I feel like the pieces always fall into place. You always make it work. You can always adjust your schedule too. Like you said, talking to the employers is going to be really important when you're planning to go back. And I just had one other question to add on then, because I'm curious now. So you are still home. You're still on your mat leave. Are you planning to change anything when you do go back to, your work schedule? Because you're doing so many things in your career. Are there any parts of your career that you might step back from? Something that you might want to change?
Yeah, I think it becomes, kind of like a good magnifying glass and to look at, your life and what you're spending your time doing. So for me, I had to, I've already done this a little bit within the last few months as I've kind of gone through, things that I'm involved in, different editorial boards, things. I have a column for Review of Optometry, and I'm involved in doing a lot of lecturing, things like that. So early on, I decided, hey, you know what? I'm not going to do any lecturing engagements where I fly somewhere until she's at least 6 months old. So that was like my hard and fast cutoff. So I made that rule just to at least have something. And then I always said, you know, if I want to go longer than that, I can later, but at least I had that. I also, you know, took a step back from being on the editorial board for a group that does amazing, great things in optometry. But I'm just like, for me, I felt like I didn't have the time to devote to it that I said that I would. And I know going forward, it's just going to get busier. So I did already kind of step back from a few things that I felt like maybe weren't on the top of my priority list in the career space. So there's always that balancing act. And the thing is, you know, I might have this figured out for me for now, for the next 6 months or a year, but there's always going to be new opportunities that come up, and then things that you might have to let go. And so I think deciding what seems right for you kind of in that moment, and thinking ahead, maybe in the next year or less, is helpful in some ways because you can decide what you have time for, because ultimately your family will come first, you know. And you know, I always have to remember that they're little for such a short period of time and they grow up so quickly that you don't want to miss those things because you felt like you were working too hard. At least that's how I think of it.
No, I think you're right. Like a baby really does put things into perspective. And I think that's a thing that a lot of people don't think about. They just still want to take everything on after because they feel like they might not get those opportunities later. But like you said, those opportunities will always still come. You just have to wait for them. But you really do have to prioritize what's important. And, you know, you're right. Your family will always come first. So you can't just spread yourself too thin and then face burnout and all that other fun mental health stuff. Good vibes only, right?
I was listening to a podcast. I can't remember which one it was at this point, but they're basically talking about how we say yes to a lot of things, especially as women. We're a lot more prone to not only say yes to different things because we feel like, you know, it's kind of an ego boost that someone asks you to like, oh, you know, it's an honor to do this thing. But also, you know, we feel like we might do a really good job at it. And it's kind of a, you know, a pride thing and you want to help people. And so we not only say yes more, but we also get asked more than men, especially for, what did they call it? Like a non-career building thing where it doesn't necessarily impact like your finances, or it's not necessarily a career builder. It's just something to do to help out your employer or your organization, but you don't get credit for it essentially.
Oh,
and so
interesting.
it was very interesting. Non-promotable task is what they called it.
Non-promotable tasks.
A non-promotable task. And that was from one called Best of Both Worlds. But
Best of Both Worlds. Okay. That's the podcast name.
The podcast. Yeah. But it was really interesting. I'm like, I feel like we do say yes to a lot of those things. And there was one person was talking about like a moment where it kind of dawned on her, and she was like, you know, going meeting to meeting to meeting, and she was super busy that day, and she kept like running past her coworker who happened to be a male. I'm not saying it's always like that. But she was like, I've literally been going meeting to meeting to meeting. We have the same job. We get paid either the same amount. You probably get paid more than her, honestly. Yet they're, you know, she's working her butt off and he's been in the same spot, you know, really thinking about things, having time to do stuff. They were I think in research. And so he was, you know, pondering all these deep research questions that they have, and she's just like busy. And so that's one thing that we need to be better at as, you know, as women, is saying no to things and, you know, taking the time to put towards things that elevate our profession, elevate us in our career, you know.
And also don't forget, no is a full sentence. You can literally say no and then leave it at that.
The Canadians might say no, thank you. But and honestly, Allison, like, you're so right. I think Deepon and I, all of our listeners probably, they should know us by now. Deepon and I learned how to say no very quickly, and we are the no women. Like, we say no to like everything now because we're so burned out. Anyways, we go, nope. Don't want to do this.
Yes. So we're getting to the end of our podcast here, Alison, but any other advice you would like to share for all the optometrists that are doing their best to balance work and family life?
I think that is the perfect way to put it, is doing your best. I remember growing up, my mom said, it doesn't matter how, if you get an A on this, it's just do your best. But that translates to our whole life, right? And, your best, some days you're going to be able to give 100%, and some days you're going to be able to give 70. And I think a lot of us, come into, you go through your undergrad, you go through, optometry school, we're kind of perfectionists. A lot of us are, not all of us, but you're always expected to have things perfectly set, planned out, but it doesn't always work out that way. So give yourself grace on the days that are tough. And I think there's never a perfect balance between the work and the life and the family and the work and things like that. And it's constantly changing. And so that's really it. I feel like I don't have any advice besides do your best, I guess.
Yeah, that was perfectly said. And the perfect way to end the conversation. So thank you so much again, Alison, for coming on. We're so happy that you were open enough to share your journey and your experiences now being a mom. Good luck going back to work. Keep us updated with how you feel and what you've been going through. We can always do a part 2 to see maybe what's changed after a few months that you've gone back. Because I'm sure a lot of people will be curious to know everything that you said today. How relevant is it, 6 months down the road? Or did you just quit optometry 100% and you're like, I'm a stay-at-home mom?
I know. Can you imagine? She's like, I'm a stay-at-home mom now. Everything I said in that podcast, not true.
You know what? I love my daughters so much, but I can't imagine staying at home with her all the time.
Yeah, it would drive you nuts. And surprisingly, I feel like a lot of women they say they would never be a stay-at-home mom, but then once they have kids, they start converting. Like they just fall in love so much that they're like, yeah. So we'll see what happens to you in 6 months. We'll make a bet.
All right, we'll make a bet. We'll make it offline and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for listening to Four Eyes, the podcast series brought to you by Young OD Connect. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Instagram or YouTube at 4 Eyes Optom for more content. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.